That was kind of cool to see that aspect of it as well. So good for her. I will. I don't know if Josie's on or if she had to grab some water. I know she was mentioning the areas that she specializes in and can handle. But remember, Century 21 Masters is statewide. So we can pretty much handle anything up and down the state of California. So with that being said, welcome everybody and welcome to our Mastering Contracts, which is every Monday from 10 to 11. We also follow that up with Mastering Transactions, which is Wednesdays from 10 to 11. And finally, we have our Mastering Your Business, which is Fridays from 10 to 11. So standing appointment, Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays from 10 to 11. We will be having classes, obviously today and Wednesday and Friday, even though we are going to be at the 121 event. There's going to be a slight schedule change on Friday in terms of topic. Because that is a day of travel for most people, and our speaker is going to be traveling. So we will do Mastering Your Business on Fridays. It's just going to be a little bit of a different topic. We will go ahead and get that changed in the resource guide later today. So with that being said, again, welcome everybody. And for those who join us regularly, I apologize that you always have to hear this little spiel to begin with. But for anybody just joining us, in addition to the classes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we also have a 90-day pathway. And that pathway includes a daily task, Monday through Friday. With that task, we give everyone everything you will need to accomplish that task, whether it's instructions, how-tos, step-by-steps, links to videos, links to news articles, anything and everything that, again, you will need to complete that task. And those tasks are designed, A, to get you in the mode of doing something real estate related every single day. They are designed for the people that wake up and say, my gosh, what am I supposed to be doing today? And they are designed to set the foundation for your business and build your business. So we are 50 days in. We just had a number of people join for day one, people who saw us give a little plug to this on the monthly Connect and have joined us. And our first group is actually on day 50. So they're well into their second month and getting ready to start their third month and finish off the 90-day calendar. So really happy. We're up to, I believe it's 130 people who are receiving these daily tasks, and the feedback has been fantastic. So with all of that being said, make sure that you are giving us feedback, whether it's constructive criticism, whether it's news of something that's worked or something that is really resonated with you, whether you've gotten an appointment, you've written a list or a contract, gotten a listing. Let us know all these things so we can celebrate some of these wins. Now, with all of that being said, today we are talking about the buyer representation agreement, property showing document, as well as a buyer non-agency. We got one more document, the open house document in there as well that we will look at. And essentially what we'll do is we have a real short slide deck today. We'll just look at the forms as a quick overview, and then we'll actually look at the forms themselves and dig into them. Okay, so with that being said, let me go ahead and share my screen and we will get started. Okay, let me minimize these things. There we go. Okay, so on your screen, you should see my slide deck. So as we talked about, we're going to be looking at the BRBC, PSRA, and the BNA. We're also going to be looking at the OHNA just real briefly when we look at the actual documents. Okay, so what exactly are these forms? And why do they matter? Okay, well, the rules a couple of years ago changed, and as part of the NAR settlement, it required us to have buyer representation agreements. Now, the funny thing is, and we talked about this when we did our forms updates and new laws, is that in January of 2026, it actually became California law that we have to have a buyer representation agreement. So the funny thing is everybody's saying, well, that's already been a law for the last year. Well, no, it wasn't. That was part of the NAR settlement. And anyone who is a member of NAR was expected and required to use that form. Okay. Well, now everyone in California is required to use our buyer representation agreement if you obviously are representing a buyer. The agreement must state what the compensation is, what the services are, when the compensation is due, and an expiration date. Okay, and we'll look at all those things in detail when we get to the form. For individual buyers, okay, the expiration period may not exceed 3 months. Now, 3 months is on the NAR side. Okay, California law says 90 days. So, people say, semantics, 90 days, 3 months. Well, not exactly. We have several months that are 31 days. So, when you're talking about, let's say, June, July, and August, okay, well, that's 92 days because July and August are both 31 days. So that exceeds the 90-day period, which may violate California law. However, when we look at, you'll see when we look at the forms, we're protected in that sense. Okay. So looking at a typical progression, and you'll see this is a common theme amongst a bunch of the slides. The BNA is basically an information only, okay, for the clients. The PSRA is just to basically see one or a couple of properties. And the BRBC is actually a full representation of the buyer, okay? And like we said, BNA is not a representation agreement. Only the BRBC and PSRA can support the buyer-broker compensation portion under our 2025 and now 2026 framework and agreement.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, go ahead.
So I represented a buyer, but I use for just that one property, and I use BRBC instead of the PSRA. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank
Absolutely.
you.
The BRBC is the most comprehensive and the most protective form. So,
Okay, thank you.
absolutely. So yes, so you can definitely use that, even if it's just one form or or one property or 3 properties or 50 properties or all properties under whatever the buyer's looking for. So, what is the BRBC? Well, that's the full buyer representation. Okay, this is longer term. It can be exclusive or non-exclusive, and we'll look at that pretty closely when we look at the actual form. And there's a compensation that's being negotiated in there. Okay, so what it does, it creates the former buyer-broker agreement or relationship. It supports ongoing search, analysis, negotiation, and transaction support for the buyer. And it can cover multiple properties during the agreement term. So what to watch out for? Current California rules, okay, sets a maximum term of 3 months, 90 days for an individual buyer agreement. Okay, it can be exclusive and non-exclusive depending on how the parties structure the relationship and how the form is filled out. And this is going to be really important when we look at the actual form. So, an escrow needs a copy of the agreement if compensation will be dispersed through the transaction, okay, which in most cases it is. So, the core clauses, scope of service, buyer duties, termination, broker duties, compensation and payment method, and dispute resolution. So most of the same things that you'll see in a listing agreement are in the buyer representation agreement, okay? Most of these things are not in the purchase agreement, as the purchase agreement is between the buyer and the seller. Now, what is the PSRA? Okay, well, this is a short-term property showing agreement. Okay, it's a lighter option for buyers who want to look at properties but don't necessarily want the long-term commitment, okay, of the buyer representation agreement, okay? And this also is to protect the agents, okay, to ensure they're going to get compensated for properties that they actually do show and introduce to a particular buyer, okay? Why agents use it? They use it for open house follow-ups, one-off showings, early stages of buyers who are just starting their process, okay, and or a trial period before a full BRBC is signed and agreed to. The key characteristics: it's a short-term representation tied to a property showing or a limited set of properties. It's a little simpler than the BRBC and designed for buyers who aren't ready to commit long term, and provides a brief protection period without a broad ongoing agent relationship. Okay, what it's not a long term commitment. It's not exclusive. Okay, and that's really important to understand. The buyers can sign multiple, okay, property showing agreements with multiple agents. All right. And it's not the right fit when buyer wants a full search strategy and transaction support across multiple properties. Okay. Now, this might be, it's important to know, this might be something that works for the buyers, okay, because it doesn't obligate them and the buyers are good with this, but this might not be something that works for you, okay, as an agent. Okay. Just like some agents will only work with sellers. Okay. Some agents who are working with buyers will only work with buyers who are committed. Okay. Even though we have a form that allows us a short-term agreement with buyers, not all agents are going to want to use this. Okay. Or work with buyers who aren't ready to commit. And that's okay. That's totally up to you. Now,
Do
looking
you
at
have
this,
to have this? Do you have to have one or the other to take someone on a showing?
to take someone on a showing, yes. Okay, unless you have a non-agency agreement, which I don't know why you would go out and show a property if you're not planning on getting compensated for it. Now, you can show your own property without these agreements, okay, or show a property for somebody within a brokerage, okay, and not have an obligation, okay. But if you're going to go out and show property, you definitely want to make sure you're going to be compensated if that buyer chooses to write an offer and eventually buy the property. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I find some people send the BRBC with the offer.
To their clients
Yes.
or to you as a listing agent?
No, to the clients.
Okay, that well, so if the client hasn't seen the property and are writing an offer sight unseen, that's fine. But
No, they take them to see it, and then if they want to write, then they write the offer. Then they add the BRBC to the offer, like have them sign it before they send over.
so and that's fine. That alleviates your obligation under the law in terms of having the BRBC before writing before submitting the offer. However, that gives you no protection whatsoever. Okay, if you go out and show the property, and then that buyer that you showed it to, when you send them the offer and the BRBC says, "Yeah, you know what? I've got a cousin. He's going to write the offer for me." Okay, you have no recourse and no protection. There is no procuring cause, especially if it's on MLS. In the old days.
Romeo, but I thought that I'm going to reiterate what you said. We're not allowed to show properties without a BRBC in general.
Well, that doesn't mean people aren't doing that.
No, I've come across agents too also that if they like the property, then they'll send me the BRBC signed that day. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and we can't control what other agents are doing. All we can control is what we do.
Exactly.
As a company, as individual agents. So if
Exactly.
other people want to, go through those motions and take that steps and leave themselves open to liability, well, then that's fine.
Noted.
So just looking at them side by side, the BRBC versus the PSRA, okay? BRBC's full representation, PRSA short term. The duration, 3 months or 90 days. Again, we'll talk about that in a little while. The PRSA is only 30 days, okay? Exclusivity, I should say. BRBC can be exclusive or non-exclusive. PRSA is always non-exclusive, no matter what. Compensation is negotiated in the agreement. Compensation on the PRSA is limited in the lighter form for showings. Okay, who's using it? Committed buyers are using the BRBC. Early stage buyers are ones that are not quite sure the PSRA. Okay, and best practices for ongoing advisory and transaction support, the BRBC. For initial meetings, tours, open house follow-ups, the PSRA is fine. And again, you get to choose. You don't have to show properties to clients who aren't willing to commit to you. Okay, that's up to you in terms of what your level of comfort is with these. Okay. Bottom line, use the PSRA to open the door and the BRBC when the buyer is ready for a broader advisory relationship.
One quick question. If you oh God, what was I going to ask you? It'll come back to me. Sorry.
No problem. So, what about buyers who don't want representation? Okay, there is a buyer non-agency agreement, because what happens is you can create what's called an implied agency, meaning that if you are opening the door and showing the property and talking to a client about the property, that is an implied, what's called an implied agency. You don't have to have a signed form for that. Okay. The problem is an implied agency doesn't have any guarantees of commission, but it creates all the liability. Okay. So if we're going to show a property for whatever reason to somebody who's not going to sign the PSRA or the BRBC, we want them to sign a BNA, okay, buyer non-agency agreement, because it basically says we are not representing you, we are not taking any liability, we are just essentially working, and it's typically working on behalf of the seller, okay, because we're showing a listing of ours or of the company's, and that all of our intentions and our alliances or allegiances are with the seller and the seller only. Okay. When does this fit? When the buyer asks factual questions and does not want representation. Okay. For an open house interaction, when the buyer refuses the BRBC or PSRA. Okay. We can also use the OHNA, which is the open house non-agency agreement, which we'll look at in a little bit as well. When the agent's providing information only, not advice or advocacy, and the broker wants to avoid accidental or implied agency. Okay, so there is no fiduciary duties owed to the buyer in this sense. Okay, the broker is not advising or negotiating on the buyer's behalf. Buyer acknowledges they are unrepresented. Okay, but the broker may have a relationship with the seller, in which case the buyer's conversations or anything that the buyer may say is not confidential. Okay, so the buyer can choose representation later, okay, by signing the PSRA or BRBC. So this creates transparency for casual or preliminary interactions. It protects the broker, so us and you, from unintended agency, and it supports compliance under the new buyer agency rules. So how can these work together? Okay, well, they can work sort of in succession, all right? Meaning that you can have an unrepresented buyer, okay, that just wants to look at your listing, okay? Again, it's factual information. There is no agency. It's best for, very casual contact, okay? But then they may say, you know what? We're really interested in this property. We want you to represent us just on this property, okay? In which case you sign the PSRA. Okay, it's short-term, not exclusive. It's just for this particular property. All right. But let's just say you represent them on that property and their offer is not accepted. Okay. And then they choose, because of all of your efforts and the relationship that you've established, you know what? We do want you to represent us and find us a property, in which case then you can go to the BRBC. Okay. So it's not always one or the other. Okay. It can be a succession, and you can use one and the next and the next. Okay, remember that the BNA is disclosure only. If you are expecting or planning on getting any compensation, it has to be either the PSRA or BRBC. And then finally, a quick decision guide on which form to use. Okay, if people are just asking questions and you're giving factual information, the BNA is fine. If they just want 2 or 1 or a couple of properties, the PSRA, and when they're ready for full representation, the BRBC.
Hi, Romeo.
Yep.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So if you had like the BNA and then they decided to make an offer on the property, you have to have them sign the BRBC. Is that correct?
Assuming that they want representation. Okay. If they choose to make an offer on that property and don't want to be represented, then no, it would still be the BNA.
So,
Okay.
but how are you going to get paid though if you wrote the offer?
Unless it's in your listing agreement. Remember when we went over listing agreements, there is a section that the seller
Yeah.
will compensate you for unrepresented buyers.
Yeah.
So you get compensated from the seller, assuming you had that section marked in your listing agreement.
If you don't have that mark, then you don't get paid.
Correct, unless you work out a deal with the buyer.
I see. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning, Romeo. I have a question. I do know that, previous to the BRBC, in fact, I do like the BRBC because once a client sign it, they are obligated. I mean, if they make an offer on a property that is being shown by another agent, they're still obligated to pay you the commission, right?
Correct.
So, are we allowed to tell? Well, firstly, we have to ask them, have you signed the BRBC with another agent?
Yes.
Sometimes they might not tell us the truth. So can we say, let me ask you this, let me tell you this. If you have signed with another agent and you're signing it with me and we get into contract, you might be obligated to pay the other agent a commission. Are we allowed to say that?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. That's actually in the BRBC. I mean, it states that. So yes.
Yeah, because then they're serious, right? Because they've signed it. Either they tell us or they cancel it with another agent, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So it's much like on a listing agreement. If a seller has a previous relationship with another listing agent, okay, and a valid contract, and they don't inform us, and they sign a listing agreement with us, and we sell the property, they may owe 2 commissions on the listing, on the sale. Okay, it's the same with the BRBC. If a buyer signs multiple exclusive BRBCs, and that's the distinction that has to be made. They have to be exclusive BRBCs. And if they are, then yes, the buyer may be on the hook to pay multiple commissions. So that is.
I remember my question now. Does the BRBC have to last the entirety of the transaction? Like, let's say it runs out halfway through. Is it still going to be valid?
Yes. So yes, it is valid. Now, the problem that you run into is if your BRBC expires during the transaction, if the transaction is to fall out, okay, and not close, then you would be left without an agreement. Okay, so best practice is to make sure that you keep your BRBC active all the way through the transaction.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so that's our quick guide to the forms. Now what we're going to do, and I will put the slide deck as usual into, I'm just saving it so I have it right at the top. I will put this slide deck into the chat as soon as we are done with the class. So let me save that. And go on to our documents. Okay, we're going to look at 4 different documents. Now, very similar to your listing agreement, your purchase agreement, your BRBC is actually a package of documents, okay? And the first of that package, as usual, is always going to be your agency relationship. I've said it a number of times now if you've been to my contract classes. Agency relationship is the single most important document in any transaction, okay? This is your do not pass go, do not collect $200 document, in that if we don't establish an agency relationship, we cannot establish or sign any other forms, okay? So this always has to be done first. That's why when you pull up these documents, it's always going to be the first document you see, okay? So, BRBC, buyer representation and broker compensation agreement, okay? B, buyer, R, representation, B, broker, C, compensation, okay? So it's for us to represent the buyer and to receive compensation, all right? Now, one of the things to note, okay, is that there is one form, okay? And this one form is non-exclusive by default. Okay. If we don't check any of the boxes, if we don't have the buyer initial in certain spots, it is automatically non-exclusive. Okay. So that's why we want to make sure that when we're going through this, that we understand that and make sure we're protecting our interest as best as possible. And in most cases, we should be making this an exclusive agreement. Okay. And again, if it's an exclusive agreement, if the buyer goes off with somebody else during the term of our agreement and purchase of property, we're entitled to commission. Okay. This is how we protect ourselves. All right. Now, much like on the listing and the purchase, top left-hand corner, date prepared. All right. That's just the date that we are filling this form out. Okay. And that's the date that we actually will reference this contract in future forms if needed. All right. So the right to represent whoever your buyer is going to be. If it's one buyer, multiple buyers, whatever it is. Okay. Now, if the buyer is an entity, obviously we need to check that box, and that's going to trigger a representative capacity form or fill it out down on the bottom. But it also limits the time frame. Okay, because if this is a natural person as opposed to an entity, okay, then this is what triggers the 90-day or 3-month period. Now, it's going to grant the broker, okay, Century 21 Masters, okay. There is no reference to an agent on this, okay. So this agreement, and technically all agreements, whether they are listing agreement, purchase agreement, lease, and the buyer representation agreement, is always with the broker. Okay. But there is no mention of the agent until you get to the signature form. Okay. So this representation is, again, for the broker. And it says right on the form, buyer representation and broker compensation. Okay. And that's why agents can't be paid a commission or be compensated. The compensation has to go through the broker. That's why no agent is mentioned on here. All right. So you're pretty much limited to the first page in terms of the things that you actually have to fill out and or make reference to. Okay. So first thing, 2A, the representation period, beginning on. Okay. Well, that's fairly straightforward. When are you going to start working with this particular buyer? Okay. And ending on 11:59 p.m. on whatever date you put in. Now, we mentioned NAR settlement allows for a 3-month period. The new California law only allows for a 90-day period. Okay, you can see the bold here. Buyer and broker agree that if buyer is not a corporation, LLC, or partnership, the representation shall end on either the ending date specified above, okay, or 90 days from the beginning date, whichever is sooner. Okay, so there's your built-in protection in that we can make this agreement good for 6 months, 9 months, a year, okay, and it wouldn't violate the 90-day period because of the way CAR structured this contract. Okay, now it could be for a shorter term, meaning it could be for a day, a week, a month, 59 or 89 days, okay, in which case then it would default to whatever the dates are in there. Okay, so that's your time frame. Now, this is probably one of the most important sections, okay, there's 2 of them in this document. All right, 2A2, type of representation. You can see here it says non-exclusive, okay? So by default, this is non-exclusive, okay? Or if you check that little box, it is exclusive and valid only if checked, and initialed in paragraph 15. And we'll look at paragraph 15 in just a minute. Okay, so 2 things have to happen in order to make this an exclusive agreement. One, that box in 2A2 has to be checked, and the buyer has to initial on paragraph 15. Okay, so again, put that, highlight, circle it, put a star, do whatever you need to do to make sure, because I know a lot of times when we're doing these forms, we go through them real quickly. All right. And one little box that's buried, in another section, all right, is really easy to overlook. So, but if you just remember in the back of your mind, by default, this document is non-exclusive. Okay. Hopefully that will trigger you to always, always, always check that box. Okay. Now, the broker, including any associate licensee working through the broker on behalf of the buyer, provides services for the type of properties and locations specified below. So again, this is a contract with the broker. Okay. So you, okay, or technically any other agent working with Century 21 Masters is covered under this agreement. Now, again, by default, this agreement is for single-family residential properties, okay, including condominiums and manufactured homes or mobile homes. Okay, that's by default. All right. So if that's what your client is looking for, single-family, condo, manufactured or mobile homes, you don't need to do anything else. Okay. If your client is looking for something else, and this is where we see some agents miss their mark in terms of having an enforceable agreement. If they were looking for income, multifamily, commercial properties for their clients, they forget to check the box, okay, in 2B1. All right, so if it's residential you're looking for, nothing else to see here. All right, if it's not residential, okay, then you need to make sure you're checking the box that you're looking for. Now, locations, okay? If you leave that blank, it's basically anywhere and everywhere, okay? Your buyers may want more specifics in terms of the county you're looking for, the city you're looking for, okay? Or any other additional description of the type of property that the buyer is looking for. Now, there is a form, okay? It's the BIPP, Buyer Identification of Preferences and Priorities, okay? And it's essentially a questionnaire. Okay, and it will help you and your buyer really drill down on what they need, what they're looking for, what they want. Okay, do you need to use that? No. Is it a required form? No. Okay, but it will give you some parameters for setting up the specifics of what's covered under this BRBC. Okay, when in doubt, make it as broad and ambiguous as possible. Okay, because that again protects you. Okay. Now, you can also exclude properties from representation. And this is where if a buyer was being totally upfront and honest in terms of having another agreement with somebody else, maybe a non-exclusive, maybe they have a previous relationship that's not quite expired, or there is a additional time frame on properties that they've already seen. So they can exclude properties from this agreement. 123 Main Street, 456 First Street, whatever it might be. Okay. And this is where you would have that discussion with your buyer if they have any other agreements. Now, Section E, okay, and this is required on all documents where there is a negotiated compensation, is that the broker compensation, okay, the amount of rate or real estate commissions is not fixed by law. They're set by each broker individually and may be negotiable between buyer and broker. Okay, and see the attached broker compensation advisory, which is included. Okay, so the amount of compensation, okay, this is where you're going to put in your 3%, 2.5%, 5%, whatever it may be. Okay, or a dollar amount, or a schedule that you come up with in terms of if the property is purchased for over $1 million at 3%. If we can get it for you for under $1 million, it's going to be 3.5%, whatever it might be. Okay, now here's where it protects the buyers in that the next section says if the broker receives compensation from the seller or others for the broker's representation of buyer, that amount shall be credited against the buyer's obligation to pay broker. Okay, so if the buyer's nervous about having to pay a commission, okay, this is the section we tell them, you know what, we're asking the seller to pay this commission. Okay, and any amount they pay, okay, is credited to what you owe under this agreement. Now, much like in a listing agreement where there's a continuation period, meaning that if in the listing agreement, if you have buyers who wrote offers or came to see the property, okay, your listing expires, all right, you can have a continuation period where if those buyers or people who wrote offers actually buy the property, you're still entitled to commission. Okay, so you may have written offers or may show properties under this exclusive agreement to your buyer, okay, and it is coming up on expiration. Okay, if you include a continuation period, you're protected from them going straight to the seller or trying to cut you out. Okay, and that continuation period can be a day, it can be 30 days, it can be 90 days. Okay, the longer the better to protect your interest.
Romeo, for compliance, do we have to have a copy of this when we enter into agreement with the buyer for our listings?
Do you have to? No. So if you're
We don't need to
representing,
have-
if you're
we don't
representing
need
the buyer, well, so hold on, let me take that back. If you're representing the buyer and going to get paid, yes. If you are not representing and the buyer's agent is asking you to pay the commission, okay, there's that one-page form they submit with their offer telling you what the commission is. Now, if there's any questions or issues with that, then you can request a copy of this, but it's not required.
What's the form that we have to ask them for then? That says what they're the CBC, the CB.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know the actual number off the top of my head, but yes, it's it's a one-page compensation form that you submit when you're asking the seller to pay your commission. So that continuation period, is it required? No. Recommended? Highly. Okay. Next section, brokers paying a referral fee. We talked about this when we were talking about the new RAD forms. We have to disclose if you're paying a referral fee, and the soonest you can do that is if and when you're signing this BRBC. So if you are paying a referral fee, that needs to be disclosed with this form. Now, cancellation rights. All right. Listing agreement can't be canceled. Okay. Buyer broker agreement can be canceled. So if it's non-exclusive, basically it can be canceled immediately. Okay, so that's again another reason we don't want you to use non-exclusives. All right, an exclusive requires a 30-day notice. Okay, whereas you can sign your agreement for 90 days today, okay, and the buyer can choose tomorrow to cancel it, okay, it would still give you 30 days. All right, so that is, an unfortunate portion of this document is it can be canceled, but at the very least, it does give you 30 days. Now, the buyer is technically required to deliver to you personal financial information with signing this form. Now, usually a pre-approval letter is sufficient, but there actually is a form that you can go through and fill out, and it's much like the BIPP, the preference form. This is an actual questionnaire that will help you and the buyer determine, okay, what type of financing and funds they have. Now, if you have gone through that form, especially for buyers who are buying, first-time buyers, FHA buyers, VA buyers, buyers without significant down payments, okay, if they do not have sufficient funds to pay the broker, okay, we can check this box. All right, and them buying a property and owing you a commission is contingent on the seller agreeing to pay said commission. Okay, now this doesn't mean that the buyer has to have or doesn't have to have the funds in order to check that box. Okay, those funds can be determined by the buyer. So if they determine, you know what, I don't have 3% of $1 million, I don't have an extra $30,000, even though my bank says I have $100,000 in it, I don't have an extra $30,000 to pay you a commission. Okay, so if you ever get pushback from the buyers to say, you know what if the seller says, no, I'm not going to pay a commission, in which case I don't have the funds to pay you. Okay, well, you can check this box. okay, which says that the buyer is not obligated if the seller doesn't, okay, agree to pay them. Okay, is that recommended? Not necessarily, okay? That's reserved for buyers who really can't, because again, you could be limiting yourself on the amount of commission you receive. Okay, other terms, anything under the sun, okay, in terms of what you and the buyer agree on. Now, unlike listing forms or purchase forms, okay, that have a couple of pages of actual documentation that we need to do, BRBC doesn't. One page, fill it out, that first page, and you're done. Okay, everything else is basically informational, okay, and describes everything that is on that first page, except, okay, when you get to page 5. All right, now this is the second biggest portion of the document. Okay, remember when it said this is a non-exclusive document unless you check that box and the buyer initials. Okay, this is where the buyer initials, top of page 15. Okay, and you can see here exclusive representation. If exclusive is checked and initialed by buyer here. So those two things have to happen. Okay, if that box isn't checked, buyer initials, non-exclusive. Box checked, no buyer initials, non-exclusive. Okay, it has to have both. Okay, now, if this agreement is exclusive, broker will devote time and resources to assist buyer in finding and acquiring the property in the expectation of being paid for the broker's services. Buyer shall not enter into another representation agreement in conflict with this agreement. Okay, broker is entitled to compensation if buyer acquires property during the representation with or without broker involvement, even if another broker is entitled to be paid for representing the buyer. Okay, remember we said if a buyer signs 2 agreements, they can be on the hook for having to pay multiple commissions. Okay, somebody asked, should we tell the buyer that? Yes, we should, and it's actually written right here in the agreement. Okay, either the buyer or broker may unilaterally cancel this agreement by giving 30 days written notice. Okay, so and then if this is about to expire within 5 days after the effective date of cancellation or expiration, broker provides a buyer a list of properties for which there was broker involvement. The broker may still be entitled to a compensation if buyer purchases one of the properties on the list during the representation period or continuation period. That's where that comes into play. Okay. So if it's an entity buyer, fill out all the entity information. If it's just an actual buyer, they sign the bottom, and then you as the agent sign on behalf of the broker. Okay, this is the space that you are actually acknowledged as the agent for the broker. Okay, now just like purchase agreement or listing agreement we talked about, there's a package. Okay, and in that package is the agency relationship, possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. There is the broker compensation advisory. There is the buyer investigation advisory. And finally, there is the California Consumer Privacy Act advisory. Okay, so that is the BRBC. Now, PSRA, okay, is also going to include an agency relationship. Okay, now, this form is a lot easier, a lot smaller, just like the slide deck said, okay? There's a lot less to it. This is only 2 pages, all right? And this is intended, all right, for use with a limited number of properties. And it is non-exclusive only, okay? Meaning that you're just showing certain properties. A buyer may have 1 or more. They can have up to, unlimited amounts of these agreements with other agents. Okay, and they're only, okay, agreeing for showings and representation of the properties that are listed. Now, it gives you space for 3, but there's also a box you can check and list all of the others if there's going to be more than 3. Okay, so the broker agrees to virtually in person to show or give a tour of the properties identified above to the buyer. Okay. Buyer grants the broker non-exclusive right to represent the buyer in acquiring the properties identified above on the following terms and conditions. Okay. Representation period. All right. BRBC can be up to 90 days. The PSRA only up to 30 days. Okay. Or on completion of the transaction, whatever occurs first. Okay. The amount of compensation, very similar to BRBC. Okay. You're negotiating whatever your compensation is. Okay. Again, if the broker receives compensation from the seller, then the amount shall be credited against the buyer's obligation to pay. There is a continuation period in here, just like in the BRBC. There is a section for a referral fee, just like in the BRBC. Okay. Cancellation, okay, is immediate on this. Okay. So if a buyer signs with you today and at 5 o'clock tonight decides, you know what, I don't want to work with you anymore, can cancel immediately. Okay. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Again, 2-page form. Buyer signs.
Can you explain the B3 again? Just what is
B3.
it? Yeah,
So the
go back up.
continuation period. So that's after, okay, the 30-day period. You can actually give a list of properties that you've shown to the buyer and or wrote offers on.
Oh, okay.
And those properties are going to be listed on here. Okay.
And
or
what
on
about the
other form.
B2? The B2, so the broker receives a compensation from seller and others pursuant. But how do they know how? Oh, because you do put a compensation amount in there.
Correct.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. So
But just for those properties.
The compensation you receive from the seller cannot exceed the amount that you have agreed to with the buyer. Okay. Now that amount can be negotiated down. Okay. But it can never be more. Now, let's just say that you're holding an open house and you've got people coming in and you just want to basically protect yourself, okay, from non-agency. Again, you don't want to have that implied agency, okay? There is a open house visitor non-agency disclosure and sign-in, okay? A lot of agents have their own sign-in form that they use, and that's perfectly fine, okay? CAR, okay, has a form that you can actually use, okay? And it lists who the agent is, who the broker is, all right? And it gives any visitors coming in, okay, specific instructions, okay, that we are not representing them, okay, that any communications that they have may be for the benefit of the seller because we do represent the seller, okay, that any communication that they have is not confidential, okay. If they do choose to write an offer, okay, at that time, we may require them to sign an agreement with us and or a non-agency agreement stating that we're only going to represent the seller. Okay. And if the visitor does want to be represented by us, okay, then we can sign the PSRA or the BRBC at a later time. Okay. That's all disclosed right on this form. That's not listed in the slide deck, but that is an additional form that you can use. Okay. The one that is listed in the slide deck is the buyer or tenant non-agency agreement. Okay. Now, this is automatically for a buyer. If it's for a lease, then you check the box. Okay. But we're listing the players in this transaction. The seller, okay, is the owner of the property described as 123 Main Street, situated in wherever it's situated. Okay. Now, this buyer, okay, has made or is contemplate making an offer on this property. Okay. We list, and I apologize, we didn't put the broker in here, but Century 21 Masters is the seller's broker, is a California real estate licensee. Okay. Or if checked, there is another real estate licensee other than the seller's broker who represents the buyer. Okay. Meaning that there is no relationship between the brokers whatsoever. Okay. Now, I'm not quite sure when that case would take effect. it's not something I've seen or encountered. So, for the most part, this is for buyers who have no representation. So it's basically going to tell the buyer, okay, that the seller or the broker, okay, has a relationship, and that relationship is exclusive between the two. Okay, we will not, meaning the broker, be the buyer's agent. Okay, so we can furnish them with all of the documents, including contract and disclosures, because that is the best interest of our seller and our fiduciary duty to our seller. Okay, but they are not going to be represented by us. Okay, so they can have their own representation, and that's number three, they're represented by another broker. Okay, and I guess that would be the case would be if that broker is not a member of an association or a realtor. Okay, because they're not going to be protected or fall under all of these CAR forms. All right, or the buyer or tenant is not at this time represented by another broker. Okay, again, we still can get compensated, assuming that our listing agreement provided, okay, for unrepresented buyers. Okay, if not, unfortunately, we are stuck with presenting this offer to our seller and having no compensation. Okay, that's why it's super important that we have at least some type of, whether it's a 0.5%, 1%, 2%, something in the unrepresented buyers. Now, is this common? No. All right, and we've done probably 5,000 transactions combined since these new laws went into effect. And I've seen it maybe 3 times. Okay, so it's not something that happens very often. Okay, but every once in a while, and the times that we did see it was usually like when an attorney was purchasing for themselves and they didn't want representation, they were going to represent themselves. Okay, so it's not something that's very common. However, we do need to make sure that we understand this form exists because it protects us from, again, creating that implied agency, okay, or creating a dual agency, okay, under which there are a lot more liabilities. Okay, so essentially those are the 4 forms that you will see and use when showing properties and or dealing with buyers. Questions, comments, concerns? Again, I will save this and put these forms into the chat once I stop sharing. So questions, comments, concerns?
Hi, Romeo. I do have a question. In that event, because I do know a lot of attorneys refuse to sign it. So are we allowed to say, well, then I do not want to represent you? Because you don't want to work for free, correct?
Correct. Yeah, you get to choose who you work with. So, but unfortunately, under our listing agreement, okay, we have a fiduciary duty to our seller, okay, and that fiduciary duty extends to buyers who are not represented. Okay, so in that case, we do have to present that offer. Okay, now if we present the buyer non-agency and the buyer refuses to sign it, okay, that's fine. We've done our job. Okay, they are afforded no protections because they don't sign it. So other questions, comments, concerns? Again, I'm going to put in the slide deck and those forms into our chat. And just real quickly, while people are thinking of their questions, I forgot to mention, if you were on at the start, or if you weren't, mention it for the first time, we have, in addition to these classes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 10 to 11, standing appointments, contracts on Monday, transactions on Wednesday, building your business on Fridays. In addition to that, we have a 90-day pathway. That pathway allows anybody who's involved Monday through Friday to receive an email daily task. And those tasks essentially will help build the foundation of your business. And what we do with those tasks is give you everything you will need to complete them, okay? From a how-to a step-by-step to a video or a link to a news article in some cases. So if that is something that is of interest to you, and you're not currently on that daily email pathway, put your name and email address into the chat, and we will make sure that you get those starting today. So as I mentioned, we've got about 130 people doing that. We are on our 8th group who are receiving these. Group 1 received their day 50 task today and are well on the way to completing their 90 days.
Hi,
So,
Romeo.
Yes, go
Can
ahead.
I ask you a question?
Please.
Say a buyer already signed a BRBC with another agent, and that buyer wants to see your listing, and then you're gonna represent her, right? So then can she sign a BRBC with you as well?
Yes, they can definitely sign a BRBC with us. That doesn't necessarily mean they won't owe a commission to another party. So, and that's what they have to be aware of. So if their BRBC is non-exclusive, then there's no problem. If it's exclusive, then they may be on the hook for 2 commissions.
I see. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Romeo,
Yes, sir.
I don't know if I missed this, but do sellers have a say in which form they want used at open houses? For example, because I get very involved in open houses, and I do feel like I may cross some lines in terms of sharing information. And I thank you for going over the open house non-agency today, because that's what I think I should be using going forward.
Sure.
I can't just sit back and just let people walk around and watch, but at the same time, to get buyers, I want to get their information, and this is a great way to help get information. But can you not, or can you not allow a visitor to come in to the open house at all before at least signing the open house non-agency? And like, let's say if the seller is like, I don't want anyone coming into the open house without, signing in. So you can turn people away without having any kind of repercussion is what I'm asking.
Yes, you can, but you have to be diligent that that's what you do for everybody. I wouldn't do it as an agent, but if that's the direction of the seller, then absolutely. You have to be careful that because of discrimination issues. So if somebody's not willing to sign the document, you can basically say, oh, well, unfortunately, our seller has required us to gather information of everybody coming into the property. So unfortunately, if you're not willing to share that information, then we can't let you in. So, and that's at the seller's request or discretion, not at ours. So I would be careful, to how you word that. So like somewhere like New York, for instance, in order to attend an open house, you actually have to provide a form of ID. So obviously that's not required here in California, but there are certain states that do require a higher level of vetting than we do. So a simple form. Now people can actually sign the form and put in bogus.
You mean you can't come into an open house without identification?
In New York, yeah.
Oh, but you could vote.
Absolutely, multiple times in some cases.
Oops.
That's good.
Do you think, do you think are there any talks of like that happening here in California? Because it would be great if things were standard in that sense. And then also to add to what you just said, Alex did a great presentation about open houses, Alex Hollander, where if as far as positioning the whole sign-in process, if you're not willing to sign in, we would love for you to schedule a time with your agent to come back and view personally. So, but have you heard of any talks of that happening, like in California? Was something?
No, for as progressive as, and when I say progressive, read into that as you will. But as progressive as California is, no, it's not something I've heard of, nor do I see happening.
Tell us how you really feel. I'm just kidding.
So other questions, comments, concerns? Okay, so I put slide deck and those forms into the chat. Download if you choose to. Again, anybody that wants to receive those daily tasks, go ahead and name and email address into the chat, and we'll get those sent out to you right away. We'll get you started today on that 90-day pathway. For everybody else, I will give you back your Monday. If you are traveling to 121, safe travels, and I will look forward to seeing you out there. I will be back with you both Wednesday and Friday. As we mentioned, Friday is going to be a little bit of a schedule change because we've got some people traveling back from 121, but you still will see me on here at 10 o'clock. So have a great week, everybody, and I will look forward to seeing you on Wednesday, if not sooner, at 121.
Thank
you,
you.
Romeo.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Romeo.
You're welcome, everybody.
Looks like you're up, Poonam.
Yep, I just pulled up another list. Oh, my script book. Let me go grab it.